Juneberry at large is a 750-acre farm. We practice intentional regenerative farming here.
Think about it this way, that the chef and our kitchens are literally amplifiers, like speaker system, the wall of sound for the land, right? Whatever we eat, whatever we're doing, we're contributors. We are literally participating on that stage together. And that's kind of the idea, that we are all participating. We're not just recipients. If you're not a farmer, it doesn't mean you're just a recipient to some food system. You're a contributor. And whether or not you feel like you are is a really important thing, because you are.
Please give a warm welcome for Ashes and Arrows from Asheville, North Carolina.
Not blood. We are wild horses chasing dreams. No one could ever stop us. Try and stop us. You can't tame wild horses.
Thanks guys so much, we appreciate it. Again, we're Ashton Thompson. We hope to see you again.
All right, folks, everybody hear me okay? Is that too loud? Am I too in your space at that volume? Okay, we're going to roll with it then. Welcome to Juneberry. My name is Ashton Thompson. I have the honor and privilege of being the Chief Operations Officer here at Juneberry. Is this anybody's first time? Okay, so we'll give a brief history of the farm, really brief. That's not what this talk is about, but Juneberry at large is a 750-acre farm. We practice intentional regenerative farming here. We are also a hospitality and event center as well as an education center. We are on a mission here to change the way the world grows, and we try to do that through nourishing, educating, and building a better future. So I appreciate y'all coming back and being out here. But the way this is going to work, we've got Jack Algiere here, very excited for you guys and also myself to get to glean some wisdom from this man. So Jack's been with us since Thursday afternoon. He's down from New York, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, his organization, and really just anything you'd like to start by kicking us off here, Mr. Jack.
So I'm originally from Rhode Island. Born and raised there, went through school and farmed on a homestead, my family, and studied agriculture in school and farmed biodynamically, organically my whole life. I traveled to different places around the world, farmed and across the US also, and ended up back in New York in 2003 to start Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, which is a historic barns and park preserve property that's about 30 minutes north of Manhattan. It's a sort of surprisingly protected and beautiful forest and preserve pastures there. There's about 500, 600 acres worth of pasture and 60 acres of carriage trails that get about 1 million visitors a year from the local Westchester community around us in New York City. And we've built over the past 20 years a center for food and agriculture that has an extraordinary Michelin, multi-Michelin star restaurant, Blue Hill, and an event space, and a very diverse working educational farm that has, so I oversee a team of about 25 farmers in different areas that are focused on multi-species grazing and organic vegetable production, greenhouse production, bees and gardens and you name it, grain. And it's all really about getting people connected to the land and getting people connected to this through line between how we relate to nature, how we connect with that through eating and processing and growing, and how we kind of raise our awareness and our understanding of how important it is for food and agriculture to really be at the center of our communities. So I've been there for 20 years. And in those years, I've handed off and kind of ceded a lot of my responsibilities with farming to an incredible group of young farmers that have come up in that group. And I get to come out and visit lots of other farms and help other folks and write and continue to be kind of a ringer on the farm. And so I really appreciate this time, and that's kind of why we got together here. It's just part of the great value of having organizations is to be able to share with each other. And that's why I'm here, and I really appreciated the invitation. So thanks, Ashton.
So just a little more context about how Jack Algiere, from this world-renowned, awesome farm, education center, and top-notch restaurant, winds up in Norwood, North Carolina. So Juneberry is a company on a mission. We're driven to that mission, and we're hyper-focused on it. But we also have the pleasure and the privilege to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So many people have come before us to do good work that we can emulate, or we can at least look to for inspiration. And Juneberry very much has an inspiration board, like the posters of the people that we really idolize. And Jack Algiere and Stone Barn Center is surely on that vision board, along with people like Will Harris and Polyface Farms, Mr. Joel Salatin in Virginia, and what he's done to help inspire and educate this homestead movement, as well as like innovations like the chicken tractor. I mean, I don't know if he invented it, but he surely made it popular. And so on this journey, we've been visiting these places, and we spent a whole day at the Stone Barn Center taking tours and meeting the staff and trying to understand the culture and the programs, because these guys are a whole 20 years ahead of us. And while we don't aspire to be Stone Barn Center or White Oak Pastures or Blackberry Farms or Polyface, we definitely acknowledge that we have a lot to learn from these people. And while we were there, we were even further inspired by the work that they're doing at Stone Barns, and just desperate to co-create relationship with that organization. And we've had Jack out here sort of touring our farm and kicking tires and trying to pull wisdom out of him and maybe convince him that it's worth coming back to North Carolina yet again.
Well, the thing about coming down here and seeing this place, it really helps to get perspective. When you're farming, you have a tendency to kind of stay in one place and isolate a little bit, because it takes so much time. Sort of the beauty of working in nature is that you really learn about having this kind of relationship to a place, and that you have to give it the care over decades even. And so that tends to make introverts out of people. It tends to make us kind of insular in some ways. But, I've really felt that it's so important that we look at agriculture as a kind of service to our community in some ways. So just as much as we care for and cultivate the natural space that's around us, it's really our responsibility to interact in this social movement of our work. So it matters that we're out there. It matters that we're integrated into the communities in ways, for a lot of ways, for the emergency of it all, because we know that the world is really in need, and there are a lot of issues that surround food and our own health and our relationship to food and nature. And it's a very important thing for us to focus on, but even in the long term, we really just have a responsibility for caring for the earth and caring for the stewardship of our communities. So I felt really blessed to have the privilege to be able to care for a place for so long. And in fact, I think I suppose I kind of imagined that was really what I wanted most about farming, was to be able to be in a place long enough so I could see it grow around me. And I've been able to not just see the trees grow around me, but my children grow in that space, and the community's children and our families that are around us grow in that space. And the knowledge base of that community and how important it is to cooperate which is probably the biggest lesson in all this, in our world of sort of nuclear families, and is that the farm is actually a really valuable meeting place and gathering place for us all. And that doesn't have to be a huge landscape. It can literally be a community garden. So we're finding that that movement can happen just as well in a city as it can in a rural place like this. And so we want to use these places like gathering places. When we get out and see each other and get into these conversations, there's a little bit of empathy and therapy that goes on, because we're kind of reminding each other that we're not alone in this, that actually we're struggling with the same kinds of things, and that those solutions are actually much more available to us than we think.
In my book, in my community, in the community that I'm aware of, Jack's a bit of a celebrity, right? Like, whether you know all these names or not, like Jack worked directly with Elliot Coleman, you know, sort of a huge grandfather in this community. Jack was telling me last night he's been friends with Joel Salatin for 20 years. I waved hey to Joel Salatin in his pasture and never spoke to him. Like, I got jitters, right? Like, you've had personal conversations with him. But maybe a name that you guys might also recognize, whenever I was sort of trying to get to know Jack, like my version of stalking or trolling is to just search for podcasts, and was very surprised, impressed that one of the top results was a podcast you were doing with Martha Stewart, where she was like having you out to her personal garden. And so once you reach that status, and you've earned it, I know you've earned it, I feel like I'm starting to get to know your soul here. But, you know, a guy like you could work anywhere you want. So why Stone Barns?
Yeah, thanks. That's flattering. I really have a kind of a mantra or something that I've been working on for a long time. When I ask myself, how much do I really want to cooperate? You know, because, you know, in passing, of course, obviously, everybody wants to cooperate with each other. That's really the thing. But honestly, I think in our hearts, and if I really observe myself, I know that I get frustrated and I want to do things myself and I want to get it done fast and all those different things. But I know in the end that working with others is really the future, is really what gets us forward and makes us grow. We need each other. In fact, even as our own body, we need lots of other just to make this thing work. We need good biome and all that stuff. So the reality is we're always in cooperation, and it's a really important thing to practice. And you know, for a long time, I got into this. I got interested in farming, and I've always loved nature, and I always loved that relationship to it. But the food part, growing food for people, is an act of service and an act of a movement for social action. And I think it's so important that we're not, as for the farmers, that I can speak for other farmers, that they even regardless if they're busy or whatever, they're working on their farms, but really that that we get a chance to work more directly with our community and get food, give people access to nature and to food and to knowledge about what it means, our traditions and our histories and agriculture and our relationship between the land and between our food culture and our creative art culture, the music that we have, all that stuff. It really comes around food and the way we relate to land. So I just didn't want to do it alone. I think at first I thought maybe I would take my wife and raise a family in the hills somewhere and be good with that, be self-sustained in some way. And I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to see more change, and I wanted to see it change faster. And I've learned that it's been hard, but to work in an organization and to use an institution as a tool for change has been complicated and definitely worked a side of me that I didn't expect to practice. But I think it's really critical, because you really can't hide in the hills. You know, inevitably we got to come down, and we want people to come out into these places. So that's why it's so important, not just to have one place like Stone Barns, but to have Juneberry and the many others of amazing farms that actually invite people to their place. And when you come out there, it's safe and it's inviting and it feels like home, and it feels like, you know, you can connect with your youth and you can remember your grandmother and you can think about the future in a way that's actually really positive, and it's like, oh yeah, we actually have a chance here. This is the kind of thing that can give us a little bit of hope for the future. And that's why I like to lever the institution and lean on the other specialists. I work with a lot of researchers and community farmers and activists and chefs and artists and engineers, and I love being in that community. I don't really just want to be with farmers, actually. I like to be with lots of different ways of thinking. And
Yeah, so Jack was talking about farmers and being introverted and like go and hide out in the hills, and Jack and I have had several moments this weekend or week where we've been able to sort of swap stories about our connection to the land and the landscape and our journeys to where we are. And I feel like I'm constantly in evolution as a man. Like when you have kids, you change. When you're married, you change. And like with maturity comes evolution. And I've always identified as an introvert. Now the people that work here at Juneberry will tell y'all that I'm not an introvert. I'm not shy. We'll talk. We'll get to it because that's the job to be done. But I feel the most energized when I'm alone in my wood shop or out on the land or by the creek or putting up a fence or moving animals like that. That's my happiness. And there's sort of this curse of, I will say agriculture, but I really mean horticulture. So I went to NC State and studied horticultural science in a big ag school, and I was a black sheep because I wanted to do sustainable food production and everybody else wanted to do ornamental or conventional things there. But the curse of a good horticulturalist is most of us are attracted to the plant world because we don't like people, right? Plants don't talk back. You can manipulate them. If you murder them, you don't get arrested. Like, we're not in full control, but we get to be a little bit more controlling with plants than we can with people. And so what happens is, and I mean this humbly, I don't mean this to sound conceited, but if you're good at your job, what you quickly discover is that you no longer work with plants and you only work with people, right? Like if you do your job good in this field of agriculture, whether you're a market gardener and all day on Saturday you have to talk to strangers that are supporting your life, right? Like if you're good at your job in agriculture, you end up working more with people than you do animals and plants. And I don't know if you want to respond to that. That's not something that was on the script, but you just sort of rung that bell, sir.
yeah, well, you know, I really like this term agroecology. I don't know if anybody's heard this term. You may hear it sort of surface more. It is quite an established word globally, but we don't use it a lot in the U.S. But I like the term, and we all know organic, we hear that word. We may hear the term regenerative. There are a lot of words out there. I always think regenerative can be anything. It's just an adjective. But it's nice to have a term like agroecology because it is a known ideal. It's really a worldview. It's a way for us to think differently than just agriculture's productivity. That's the goal. Be productive, right? And it's not, in my mind. It never really has been. The product that we share is actually the result of other more enriching goals like health and permanence and stability and pleasure. Like, if we want to see a future that's really sustainable, we better enjoy it. It better make us healthy. Those are the things we're aiming for, not more stuff. There's nothing about the future that is solved by more stuff. It's by better me, better you, right? Better place. And I think that's kind of one of these things about how we think wholly, is that there's a discipline to this work and a practice to this work and a movement to it. And all those things are the same. So what Ashton's saying is really right. And kind of all arrows try to get me off the farm. I'm far from home right now. And I'm anticipating getting back and seeding about 60 acres worth of pasture and some work that's just right a couple of days away from me. And I'm thinking about where that's going to land and how that's going to go. But maybe more importantly, my team, I need them to grow into their own space, and the leadership that I work with and all the programming that we do keeps saying, we need you out there, we need you out there, we need you speaking to these groups, we want direct relationship. And it's actually really been refreshing to have some time and to share and reflect on some of those ideas that you know, we've largely been judging our worth based on our physical actions and our relationship to making places healthy and productive and vibrant. And so I think it's a really important thing. And partially what's helped me do that is to continue to recognize how important it is to look at agriculture not as a profession or a place, but the intersection of how we deal with our ecosystems and what's sustainable in this place, and how creative we can actually be with it. When both of those things are recognized, it makes the kind of agriculture we want. So that industrial agriculture that we all might have issues with, that, you know, food or chemicals or whatever it might be that we recognize actually needs to be changed, the solution to that is actually in better care for our ecosystems and better care for each other and celebration of those places. When we do that, it's kind of an indirect shot, you know? When we think about those other things, it actually supports better farming practices, more diversity, better health and care to the soil, better equity for the farmers themselves, more diversity of people that can actually get access to land and farm and food. And that's been to me, that's the refreshing piece of when I'm off the farm, I'm still farming, because that's the ground for me. That's the thing that kind of helps pull me back in a little bit.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. I'm not sure where to start articulating, but maybe with a little bit of language. So language defines a lot of things. Language is powerful and it steers us in certain directions, but the word agriculture, you know, the agra part of it is the smallest part of that word. It's the culture that has to be the focus. I don't know if you care to respond to that or not.
Well, it does make me think of one of the sort of plights, I guess, to this is like, what is it that we're trying to change here? And I think the things that I feel like the 20th century gave us, I don't want to be too hard on it, but, you know, we created some pretty decent problems in the 20th century with, you know, a lot of exploitation of land and people and minerals and everything else. And we have a lot of non-renewable things that we're working off of, and we're still dependent on that stuff. And we don't get out of that problem by doing the same kind of monocultural framing that we used to do. But you can't just tell a farmer to stop. The same way you can't just tell somebody to stop spraying chemicals or stop eating McDonald's or, you know, whatever. Like, you need alternatives that are actually really enjoyable and compelling. No one wants to be told. They want to be able to seek that themselves. And so part of the work is to put ideas out there and get people curious and adventurous, you know, thinking about how they can get involved in more of this stuff. And so a couple things that we've been working on for that, like one of the principles, there's a handful of principles that we look at that are nature principles that, aside from any organic certification or agroecology or anything, very simply, these are nature principles, that the soil is the foundation of all life and health, right? So it's really the first thing to be paying any attention to. It's really the first and last thing to pay attention to. So if we want to make that better, we want to care for this thing that's below us. I mean, literally everything that's living in this thing is living in here too. You know, that's the cycle. That's the food chain right there. We get from here to there. It's not that far, but for some reason it's really far. And so we kind of have to find that bridge, and we get that by starting to diversify and starting to mix our systems and starting to share the resources that we have and starting to close the loops. You know, nature doesn't have any waste. It always has a purpose, always has a way to use that thing, and yet we can't seem to figure that out, as smart as we all think we are. We throw so much stuff away, and we try to get it out of mind, but we need to start to recognize that real sustainability means less in and more in cycle, more in flux. right? So we just keep working on ways to keep that cycle moving and to mix things and to test that. And that's hard, and we shouldn't just put that all on every farmer because nobody's making much of a margin. How could you take that risk without the rest of the community there as a net for them? And so that's what we're practicing. We're practicing testing that edge and mixing our systems, bringing our livestock team into our cropping team, mixing grains and annual systems into perennial cycles and restoring pastures, and working with all grass-fed sheep and cattle, and mixing our systems to the, solving for some of the bigger issues we have, like a lot of the chemical grain and a lot of the issues with, well, in New York, our biggest issue is that all the dairies are collapsing. And so we're looking at, just so you know, some organic dairies in the United States now are 30,000 head dairies, organic dairies. If you can imagine, how does that even happen? A family dairy that one family can actually milk and care for should be about 60 head. But you could never run a 60 head dairy if it was only a monocultural dairy. You have to do other stuff. And that's what used to happen. And we could say, well, this farming, this has been happening like this for hundreds of years. Well, that's not true. It's been happening like that for about 50 years, since our grandparents. It's not that long. And it can change. And it's going to be different. It's going to look different because we have new technologies and we have old wisdom. And we're going to keep playing with that and mixing those systems together. And so that's what we're thinking of. Like, look at what our problem is and don't try to find some brand new solution to solve for it, but find new ways to mix with the new ideas that we have. So rather than just, Ashton and I were talking about farm to table and how everybody's kind of familiar with that idea, but really it's pretty shallow. What we need to have is think about it this way, that the chef and our kitchens are literally amplifiers, like speaker system, the wall of sound for the land, right? Whatever we eat, whatever we're doing, we're contributors. We are literally participating on that stage together. And that's kind of the idea, that we are all participating. We're not just recipients. If you're not a farmer, it doesn't mean you're just a recipient to some food system. You're a contributor. And whether or not you feel like you are is a really important thing, because you are. And that's kind of what we're trying to get around to, is give people a little bit more contact, so you might be a little more curious to testing out that idea. How much effect do I really have by eating better, by sitting around the table with my family, by cooking together, by supporting our local sources, farmers and artisans and everybody that's in. I mean, that's kind of the way that we nurture that culture.
Yeah. Jack said several things that I'd like to touch on. We'll see how many of them we get through here. So one of the things that Jack said is the importance of soil health, right? Like, we're so dependent on soil health, and what's in the soil is in us. So many people are so focused on those 5 principles of soil health, or now we've added a 6th one to include context, right? That may or may not have been the principles you were talking about, is what came to mind. And like, that is our focus. If we focus on these 5 principles, the soil will succeed. But the soil succeeding in singularity really means nothing. And one of the other words of wisdom or phrases of wisdom or contention that I learned is that regenerative agriculture and holistic management as a philosophy are like sisters that fight a lot. They have a lot of the same DNA, but regenerative agriculture is hyper-focused on soil health, where holistic management is hyper-focused on the health of the whole. And how before we can fix our soil, S-O-I-L, we need to fix our souls, S-O-U-L. And how if we can't bring better culture to the agra, what's the point?
At the end of the day, I think one of the easiest ways for all of us to understand what soil is and soil health and systems is just, well, if we're all one, then this same analogy applies to ourselves. When we think about what we might need, what we need to be healthy in our and flourish right, in our regular life. It's all really kind of the same thing. I think about it like this. You need a kind of three-part blend. You need to make sure that you rest, that you're nourished, and that you exercise, right? Those things have to happen in parts. And, you know, nature isn't so cruel as to hold strictness to this. And if you've ever been to college, you know you can go for a long time without sleep. If you ever had kids, you know you can go for quite a while without sleep, right? If you work in a certain way, you know you can go without exercise, especially when you're young. You can go without exercise for a long time and still be strong and wake up and go. And you can eat pretty poorly for a long period of time before something happens. The reality is, when we know about that, what we know is usually the consequence of that stuff. It's never really that obvious. When we're hungry, we get cranky. You know, all these different things come in. It's not like we start to hurt here. We start to get mad here, right? And, you know, there's a lot of this kind of relationship in the soil. And we see that the part of reading, participating in nature, and one of the things that I like it's kind of the inside thing among people that get to work on the land, is that we get to know it. We get to know how to read it like a child. We get to know its personality and its place, and we get to see, you know, when the color's a little off. You know, when the vibe is just not quite right. And it's important that there are readers, that they're kind of seers in that way. And that's why it's so important to have people in our community to do that. Even among farmers, it's important to remind each other as farmers that that's an opportunity for us. When we get stuck in the cab of a tractor, we're not seeing a lot. We might say, you couldn't do this. You don't know the RPM I'm supposed to be at and the rate I'm supposed to be dropping this seed out. I've been doing this my whole life, and that's just how that goes, right? Good luck if you want to do it. And there's a lot of that heel digging. But really, at the end of the day, what we are is we're relating to the earth. I worked on cars since I was 6 years old, and mechanics play a big part of this. But it's really the soft stuff. It's really the soft relationships that matter in this kind of work. No, I know, I'm just kidding.
Relationship, like the word regeneration is becoming a buzzword, and it feels toxic to me, right? Like, and regeneration is an adjective. When I talk about regeneration, I'm talking about spiraling upward, restoring, healing, making the land better, not coming by my food because it has a cool word attached to it, right? And what Jack is talking about, how to read land, it sounds foreign and kind of woo-woo, like you're talking to the land or you're reading the land or what's the land telling you today. But I would imagine all of us have an intimate relationship in some way, shape, or form. Like, there's a person that you see every day, and you don't have to ask them how they're doing because it's written on their face before you get close enough to talk to them, right? Or your dog or your cat or whatever your reality is. But also, like, if you work with your hands for a living and you depend on tools, and those tools become an extension of your being, like, you know, the second you turn the key on that tractor, something's off. Or like the first time the tires roll over, that one of them's low in air, or whatever your reality is, whatever paradigm you relate to, we have that relationship with something. And some people just have the gifted ability or the trained or learned ability to do that with the natural world. It's not like I go out and talk to trees, or that I think I'm uniquely qualified to read land. But we do offer some training here to basically understand how this land is moving, either upward in restoration or downward into denusion. But we tend to call that regenerating or degenerating because we got to have a word to get started. We got to have a language that we can all understand. It's very painful for me that the word regeneration is getting abused, because it was a damn good word when it started. And you know, sometimes, and I say this with sincerity and kindness, but my marketing team knows that I struggle with sometimes the way we use that word. And I learned plant identification in college, and it requires like all of your senses and true relationship to like catalog that information, and it is truly relational. But I don't get to practice it enough. I start to forget some things, and I have two little boys that are running around here, and the youngest one loves flowers. And for the third time, we went for a walk, and he grabbed some random wildflower that I didn't know the name, and he finally said, "Daddy, you got to start learning these plants because I want to know what they are." So I downloaded an app, and I thought to myself, like, I wish I had the time to go ask my neighbors what this plant is, like to do it the right way, to find a mentor and do better. But I don't have time right now, or I'm not prioritizing that amongst the way I spend my time. And then I thought about this because we have to forgive ourselves for where we are, accept where we are, and continue making forward progress. I don't want to die on that hill. I want my 5-year-old to learn these plants.
Yeah, well, I think what you just said is really important, is that we don't beat ourselves up, and that we don't, I think this world has so much to learn. We're always being given so much information. There's more information there in front of us than ever before by a long shot. And yet we still all feel totally inept, and especially in nature, because we're not getting the time in it. We're looking at screens, and all the stuff that's supposed to be there for communication is really taking us out of communication. And realistically, when you spend time in your yard, outside, grow a plant in your kitchen window, I mean, you can talk to your basil. Why not? You know, it'll listen. You might not say anything. It's probably not going to say anything. If it does, you might want to get help, real help. But you can talk to it. And when you're out in the space, you know, the reality is I've always been a big proponent of plant ID, mostly because I want to know them. I want to know more about what the place is doing. And I feel like if I can name them, like if I know you, we can go places together. We can learn more. We can find the commonalities among us and recognize how we are as people. When it's easier to be skeptical when you don't know somebody. And the same is true for nature. When you know the space, and you learn the oak, and you learn the maple, and you learn the sweet gum, and you kind of recognize when they bloom and what kind of medicine they might give you, and what the bark tastes like, and whatever that thing is, it gives you context. It gives you relationship, and all that stuff. It's only to be fulfilling. It's not to say, man, I wish I knew 10 more trees. That should be a goal, but it shouldn't stop you from learning. And I guess that's kind of the thing, is that often we get stopped in our tracks because it feels so huge. How do we solve for climate? How do we solve for biodiversity? How do we solve for all this community inequities? Well, we just start where it's simple, where it feels good, where it's easy. In some ways where it's easy, I think I say a lot to my team. What's easy is redoable. It's something we can do again and again and again. And every time we do it, it gets better and a little bit different, and we learn from it.
Yeah. And this is an important element, is that we are nature, right? Like, we are a part of nature. We're not over it or under it, or we shouldn't exclude ourselves from it. One of the most empowering quotes that I've heard to sort of identify this is Aldo Leopold says, "We abuse land because we see it as a commodity that belongs to us. But when we begin to see land as a community to which we belong, we start to treat it with love and respect." And I think that's sort of what you're getting at, Jack. We're not going to the zoo. We're existing. We're being present in the moment with the nature as a part of it.
Yeah, Leopold would say, if we recognize that we're plain citizens of this earth, then that's really the key, is that we need to recognize that we're not something over this place. Even if we might feel like we're really cool because we can get stuff on Mars. The reality is we're really just a part of this thing. And we're actually in some ways a really important part for us to feel like we're good for it. Like we can do something good with it. Not to be scared of it or feel like, oh boy, every time we turn the corner here, we're doing something worse to the place. So that's just the reassuring thing, that we can get to that place. So I don't know how our time is, Ashton. Do we want to open any questions or anything? Or?
No, I want to give one prompt here. You just said about being a citizen of the plane or the planet, And typically, I like to close these shows, and that was last season. We can evolve into something new. But by just asking our guest speaker while they're here, what can we do? Like, whether we're producers or consumers or just citizens of the planet, what can we do to be a part of the solution? And that's open-ended, the solution to whatever you want it to be, if you have a thought towards that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what I just said. I think what's really important is that we find the easiest thing, and then we try to find a habit with that thing, right? Not just a one-time. Like, everybody's here. I'm glad to see people came back to this place. This is a great moment for everybody to kind of come together. And what does this start for us? What does this get us off and running with? You know, we were talking about farmers markets as a way to engage in the community. Farmers markets are great, but I've been doing them my whole life. But I also think in all the years, in the practically 40 years of being at farmers markets, I think to myself, you know, we're still in a commuter lot on a Saturday, and nobody's got to show up. The farm's got to show up. Got to drive 4 hours away from my house. Got to show up in that parking lot in the rain, put my Easy Up. I grew all this food and probably bring half of it home. That's not equity. Like, our communities, we have to recognize that in order for, like, we really just, I think I would say just, we all have the right to access to nature, to food, and to knowledge. All of us. Everybody should have the choice to access those things. And that's what we should be doing in our communities. If you have the privilege and the luxury to be able to make more of those things than you can do yourself, you should be sharing them with the rest of your community. And so that's an easy, start from there. Wherever you think that means for you, that's the thing to start the new habit for. If it means I can grow more food in my house and put a garden in because I have this sweet little backyard, or it means I can go to the farmer's market instead of just get all my stuff from the grocery store, then I go to the farmer's market every week. I mean, I grow all my own food. We grow all our own food at the farm, but I will tell you, I go to the farmer's market not this Saturday. Every Saturday, pretty much. Actually, my wife went this week, and we just bring the same amount of money every week to the farmer's market. And that's what we do. We just put the money into the market. Sometimes most of the time it's to the same vendors, because we love a couple of these really young farmers that are great growers. Their produce is beautiful. Their meats are really well grown. And we put it at them. And we go there every week. It's just a way to do that. We also go to the grocery store. But the point is that we go to the farmer's market first. And I think just steps like that, just choosing the first choice, the closest choice, your family, your neighborhood, your community. I think that's an easy step. And if you really have the privilege and the means, keep going, bigger. Fund other actions. Set up, help out the food bank, help out your local community garden. You know, that kind of stuff, all that stuff.
Yeah. So we are formally finished. We're also going to entertain some questions. Sure, Mr. Brian Sharp.
Yeah, just curious, how do you use your restaurant to promote your farming practices?
All right, so how do we use our restaurant to promote our farming practices? From the very beginning, we used to have this metaphor as that the food system is a dance, and the farmer always leads. Right? The idea here is, when we started doing this together, and we have a very special thing. It's not like he's down the road. He's literally, the cooks can come out and the farmers go into the kitchen. Part of this is about 20 years of this call and response dialogue that we've had, and it's very rich. We grow 500 different crops. We have 6 different species of animals and lots of different animal breeds. We do a lot of our own breeding. All this is very rich, active environment that's mixed. It took us a long time to get to that place. But when we first started, one of the first and probably the most fundamental things we did was just totally evaporated the menu. The menu was probably one of the biggest obstacles to what we were doing. The fact that anybody wanted the same thing at any time in any season. Even in a seasonal menu, it was still very obstructive. right? It just was a total obstacle to what we needed to do. We wanted to have like fluency, and it wasn't just because we wanted to be able to grow whatever we want and whatever quantities we wanted, because in fact we have to respond to make sure that we're actually dialing in the real right number in the right season with the right breed, and that we have enough that we can test with. So first thing is just curiosity and adventurousness, that they have to be in that mindset, adventurous and all that. The next thing they have to do is be able to get that perception across to the customer, right? And the menu piece is a really big part. So instead of having like menu items, in the back of house, they have about 90 different storylines that can include all kinds of different ingredients, but tell stories about the kind of farming that we do and the kind of interactions that happen between things in nature, on the farm, between farmers. It could be about waste feeding chickens. It could be about fermenting grain. It could be about mixing animals in cropland or cover crops, eating cover crops, looking at waste cycles, looking at soil health, making plates and cups out of bone from grass animals. That we're exploring these ideas. Of course, the food has to be delicious. All that stuff has to be like, I mean, at the end of the day, the senses, the aesthetic of the whole thing has to be there. So all that's critical, paramount. Like all that classical cook stuff that happens needs to be there, but in a way that is way less structured and more kind of, they're like storytelling.
So instead of a menu, you give them a story and they pick what story they want to follow? Like
they don't get to pick. The hospitality, they don't get to pick anything.
Oh, it's just whatever's there.
I thought you were about to get up and start.
What are you saying, man? So that I think they really don't get to pick. It's really more like we have this amazing hospitality team that is kind of testing the group and finding out where they're adventurous. Of course, not everybody. I mean, some people just want the steak, right? And there's a way to navigate that. So you kind of test the vibe of the table, where everybody wants to go. If they're really in. Another thing we do is everybody that visits the restaurant in some way or another, whether it's lunch or dinner or whatever, we have several different kinds of ways to eat there, is that we move them around the farm and they get to see the whole place. And we're fairly curative about that, when we take them out into places and kind of, without them knowing, we're kind of showing them what they're about to eat. Right? And they get back into that restaurant and they're sitting at that table, and there it shows up in this way that they couldn't have ever imagined. Right? And now they start to ask a question. Well, what about those peas we just ate? That you guys bred those? I didn't know there was purple peas, and that's really cool. And then here's that next thing. And then they're like, oh, this plate is made out of, what's this made out of? Oh, it was made out of our bone from our cattle. And, you know, it turns out that grass-fed bone makes much better china than you could imagine. And we make this bone china. And, oh, wow, that's really amazing. I wasn't even thinking about that with beef. And then they're like, have you known that, you know, grass-fed beef is much better on the soil and it sequesters carbon? And, you know, and then we keep going down this lane, and by the time they're done, almost every table gets a different experience. But in the kitchen, it's all the same ingredients. It's just we're navigating into this section of stories, and it's a very valuable way to, again, like I said, we're using that restaurant like an amplifier to get the stories for what we're doing across through the food and through the materials that we're actually making, down to the tea and down to the alcohols and everything else that's in there. They all have a way to tell that story, as they should. They're all from the ground, and yet we can barely tell that chicken is a chicken. You know what I mean? We have a lot of work to do. But in some of these, so in some situations, if a person's really that far out and that guarded in the way they eat, we'll care for that too. We don't want to make anybody feel bad in that space. We want them to enjoy their experience. But if you're willing, and a lot of people are willing, we keep pushing. And that's kind of the idea.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.